Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, whichever time you're viewing this on. Today, I'd like to welcome you to Can We Talk? And my guests today are Bob Tammen and his wife Pat from northern Minnesota, and I'll let them tell you about where they live and their history. And I want to, before we get going on the story, I want to let people know a little bit about the next two episodes that will follow today's episode because we're filming on October 23rd, and you won't be watching this until sometime into 2020 probably. There'll be 3 different months in a row where Bob and I will be talking about polymet and mining issues and environmental concerns in Minnesota. Those two episodes will follow the 2 months following this when you're watching this episode. And so I just wanted to give a little teaser about that. And the reason the map is back here is because Bob is an expert on mining, was involved in the mining industry, and has tracked the polymet issue for something like 14 years now,
Yep.
and has a vast amount of knowledge, far more than I do, and that most people watching this, I think, do. And it's fascinating to hear their story. But today we're going to focus on Bob and Pat's story and how they met and how I met them and our connection. And we're just going to have a little personal conversation about how they came together and their marriage and their travels and what keeps them together and what motivates them to spend their senior years now traveling in their little RV and going places and doing the things that they do. I won't forget what you said to me. I asked you at the last Camp Ripley protest, which was held in September of this year, when I asked you, why do you do all that you do with going to all these vigils and, speaking engagements and political events and so on? And what was your answer to me about that?
I'm trying to recall that, Rob, and one of the things I say is that I want to be an honest witness.
Yes, that is the term you used, and I hadn't heard that before. And I thought it was so important that you shared that. And just go ahead and tell me exactly what that means to you.
I think part of what it means with my upbringing, you try to have integrity, but we make mistakes. And I think as you mature through the years, you ought to learn from those mistakes. And I think back to my dad, I grew up on a farm, and my dad was a Republican, conservative old farmer. He thought that debt was bad. And I came home from Vietnam in 1965, and at that time in my life, I was a young conservative. I thought, well, we're fighting the diabolical communist over there. And I was home, maybe a few weeks, and my dad said, we got no business over there. And he didn't necessarily change my mind right away, but Dad was right. We really had no business over there. And as the years go by, I think about what I did over there, what we did after I left, what a terrible mistake it was. So I think it's important for people to come forward and be honest witnesses to what you saw. And my dad kind of inspired me in that way. And Dad also said, I like to get along with the neighbors. And we had a great variety of neighbors, different religions, different politics, but Dad tried to stay on good terms with all of them. And so, Dad was not a perfect human being. In the winter, the days get long and don't have a lot of work on the farm. He'd probably be in the pool hall, maybe a little more than he should have been. But still, he taught me a certain amount of integrity. So I think if I made a mistake, I ought to acknowledge that. And I was wrong about Vietnam. It wasn't a noble cause. We had a massive amount of firepower. We did a lot of damage over there. So to your question, I think that's what keeps me involved, to honor that principle of being an honest witness. And as years went by, I worked in the mines for several years. Not that I had any great plan for my life. It's just I was fairly decent with numbers. And so I ended up doing electrical work in the mines. So I saw how we did our mining in northern Minnesota, and as years go by, you realize our geology, our hydrology are more complicated than we realize. And in my younger days, I'd drive out in those tailings ponds. You drive out on the dikes around the ponds, and I never knew they were leaking, but in the case of the plant I work at the most, 4 million gallons a day.
Wow.
And so now that I'm in my golden years, I think it's important that we acknowledge what we've done in the past in mining, and whether it's Vietnam and stupid foreign wars or mining and bad mining practices, I think those of us who actually were involved in those situations should acknowledge it.
I agree, and that's a really good answer. Two things. You are in Veterans for Peace, correct?
Right.
And what chapter are you associated with? The Duluth one, or?
Well, actually, I first encountered Veterans for Peace. Pat and I went to an event at Grand Rapids, and they had a small group there. And Pat and I don't go to Grand Rapids a lot. We're more inclined to go to Duluth, but I joined at Grand Rapids.
Okay.
But then when we do activities, we're more inclined to end up being in Duluth just physically. And of course, Pat likes the Grandmothers for Peace, even though we're not grandparents.
They're a great organization.
The Veterans for Peace, the Grandmothers for Peace, they're a bunch of uppity women. You know, they get out there and they have their protests and their parades. So we love to join with them at those events when we can.
On the bridge above in Grand Rapids.
Oh yeah,
Protest.
you know, we used to have protests on the bridge at Grand Rapids, so Pat and I would drive over for that every now and then. And of course,
This was with Veterans for Peace? Mm-hmm. And did
Yes.
Grandmothers for Peace get involved with them then?
they work together a lot.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and they have the same principles pretty much. And I think Pat enjoyed the one when then President Bush came to Duluth, and the grandmothers got out there on the bridge and gave him an appropriate welcome.
And what was that?
You know, they had a big protest up there.
Yeah.
And so the Grandmothers for Peace are active up in our area too.
So I got to thinking about something the other day. Little Falls is only 32 miles or so from the VA in St. Cloud. And to my knowledge, there's not a Veterans for Peace in St. Cloud. Now, you would think that the county and the town that holds the largest Veterans Administration facility would have a group so that veterans, because I know that talking about this honest witness thing is very therapeutic. And that's, of course, what is, I think, the glue in Veterans for Peace. Not only to talk about this honest witness stuff from the past, but going forward to warn other younger people, men and women, about the dangers of our wars for corporate empire. And how does Tulsi Gabbard say it again? Our, what is the term that she uses?
Well, I'm trying to think of
It'll,
it too.
it'll
but
come to me. But our wars of aggression, regime change wars, that's how she identifies it, okay? So how come it is that there's no Veterans for Peace organization in St. Cloud that could go into or be available to help with all of the different generational former soldiers in their recovery and their treatment?
you
I don't
know,
understand that.
it is a little surprising that we don't have even active chapters like down there in St. Paul. They're not huge chapters. They have a lot of very active members, but not a large number of members.
Right.
And I blame part of it on the constant propaganda, pro-war propaganda, that
Yep.
we're seeing on television. You know, see all these feel-good stories about the woman coming back from combat, the lady coming back to hug her kids. And the first thing I think is, she was in a stupid foreign war. Why did she leave her children to serve in Iraq or Afghanistan? And
Where we don't have any business being either.
that's right, you know, and people think we should honor their service. But I think we're getting involved. We're using the military where we should be using diplomats. And
That's right.
we have this tremendous firepower, and it's so tempting to use that firepower when it's so profitable to so many people. You know, Minnesota has our own manufacturers that cater to the military industry, and
Right here in town, as a matter of fact.
well, you have an industry here.
Well, Airborne Incorporated, which is out on the northeast side of town across Highway 70 and 371 in the industrial park, makes military bomb components, components for all kinds of military equipment. And so we have that right here in our town.
Well, I think the military-industrial complex has a policy of trying to put some little bit of military manufacturing in every congressional district they can to get these representatives and senators lined up behind military manufacturing. So if we try to cut the budget for the military and we have to cut jobs in Little Falls, whether you approve of the foreign war or not, you think, well, you kind of hate to lose those jobs.
Yeah,
And-
that's the problem right there.
And we don't have good ideas what to do for jobs other than military manufacturing, or in our case in northern Minnesota, mining. So it's hard to get people out of the mindset that we have to do mining or we have to do military manufacturing.
Well, we do have people with ideas, but they're not in leadership position. That's the problem. The people that are leading the way can be bought.
You know,
And-
Pat and I heard Arnie Carlson, former Governor Arnie Carlson, speaking night before last,
Right.
and he said we used to have a Department of Development or something like that working on jobs for outstate Minnesota. And I believe Paul Enty might have eliminated that. I believe that's what
Yeah,
Arnie
that sounds
Carlson
about
said.
right.
And Arnie mentioned that we should still have something, and what he mentioned is some mechanism for encouraging jobs in outstate Minnesota more than down there in Minneapolis and St. Paul. He says they have a lot of jobs. They have probably problems finding enough housing for the people they have. He said, let's move those jobs to greater Minnesota. And we don't have any organized mechanism for actually trying to do that. And that'd be one of the things I think we should be doing, so we aren't
That's
dependent
correct.
on the military for jobs or on mining for jobs. We could work on moving some of those jobs out of the metro into greater Minnesota. And when you think about it, I looked at some statistics a couple days ago, and Minnesota has close to 3 million jobs, total employment. And I think mining, direct employment in mining in northern Minnesota is around 4,000. Very small percentage of Minnesota's jobs. Now, if we had an active program to encourage job creation in greater Minnesota rather than Minneapolis, St. Paul, we could reduce some of that demand for creating mining jobs or creating military manufacturing jobs. But we don't have that right now. We don't have that attitude about creating jobs in northern and southern Minnesota. And, you know, it looks like there are a lot of people that are ready to make the move. They talk about amenities. People want to live where they have, you know, maybe smaller communities and a school where their kids can be part of the community, and the fishing and the hunting and the other outdoor things. But we don't have an organized program to promote that.
Right? And there should be.
Yes.
So I want to back up just a little bit here. On the next segment, we'll talk more in depth about this. But Arnie Carlson also spoke recently in Duluth and came out adamantly opposed to polymat. And he's a Republican. Whereas Pete Stauber, who's a representative for District 8, which I'm a part of here, and you are too,
Yes,
probably,
we are.
is for polymat. And Ron Krisha and Paul Gazelka, also representing this area, are lockstep with the Republican idea that polymet is just fine. And our governor, Tim Walz, Democrat, is
Yeah.
pro polymet. Astounding that he is. Amy Klobuchar has tiptoed around
Yeah.
polymet. She's, riding the pole, thinking that you can actually sit on the pole and not take a side one way or the other. And now, recently, presidential candidate Trump is lockstep with, he wants polymet because that's his bigwig, rich, good old white boys friends that are going to profit from that. And now the presidential candidates, Elizabeth Warren, are weighing in against polymet. Tom Steyer is against polymet. So is Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg, I can't say it right. Anyway, how do you say that right? Do you know?
Buttigieg, I don't know.
Buttigieg, something like that. Anyway, it's interesting that you get people from both sides of the aisle opposed or in favor of polymet. But to backtrack, I want to let the public know how I met Bob and Pat. And it was at St. Cloud State University for a social justice gathering. It was called something else. They had some fancy name for it. And I think it was either in 2012 or 13. And Bob was one of the speakers in one of the great big rooms there. And I went and heard him speak about the mining in northern Minnesota. And I don't know if you mentioned polymet then or not. Probably you didn't focus
Probably
on that.
in some way in general. Of course, whether it's polymet's proposed copper mine or our existing iron mines, we have similar problems with the existing mine or the proposed mine. We're stuck with low-grade ore bodies in Minnesota. Maybe they'll discover some plum someplace, but all of our ore bodies are low grade. And so the problem economically comes, how can you make a profit on that ore body when the price of commodities is normal? If the price is elevated, which it often is, it bounces all over. I think it's manipulated. So when the price is up, they're making money. When the price drops down to normal, it's difficult to make money unless they have some kind of protection. We give them a break on taxes. We passed the Taconite Amendment in 64. Okay.
Yeah, 64.
And so we give them a break on taxes. We let them discharge their degraded water. But Trump put import duties on, so we're raising the price of steel. And the point I like to make is that, say here in Little Falls, where maybe you have some manufacturing that uses some steel,
I'm sure we do.
even your military manufacturer, they're consuming steel. So as a former miner, I guess I should support subsidies for the iron mining, but as a kid that grew up on a farm, I realized when you subsidize that iron miner, you're raising the price of steel, and so the farmer that has to buy some very pricey farm machinery has to pay more for their farm machinery. So when your farmers here in the Little Falls area go buy one of those $200,000 harvesters, they're paying that atrocious amount of money, partly because they're subsidizing northern Minnesota steel or iron mining industry. And it's a tough problem. It's not that I want to pull the plug on the industry where I worked, but I think we should start facing reality and start to transition away from hard rock mining in northern Minnesota. And the first thing you'd want to do is quit permitting on the copper mining industry. It's a low-grade ore body. It's never going to be really globally competitive. And we should start looking at the iron mining industry with the idea that it's not going to last forever. And a lot of states have gone through this before us. I believe the only states now that have iron mining are Upper Michigan and Minnesota. And historically, there are a lot of states. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wyoming had iron mining. There were a lot of states that had an iron mining industry, and those industries withered away. And so you know, it's just a matter of time before our iron mining is done with, and we can keep trying to prop it up with subsidies, but we're damaging our other industries in Minnesota when we do that. So that's what we're faced with. We're faced with a hard rock mining industry that is not globally competitive.
That's interesting. So that day that we met down there at St. Cloud State, I don't know where you were in the audience, but I was filming, and I put that film on this television channel so that people would see the presentation. And there were a number of others that I attended as well. Women Against Military Madness did a presentation on drones, and two very brave young women from St. Cloud State give a presentation on the hijab, wearing the hijab, and you know, the history of how women are veiled in, you know, the Catholic faith, the Jewish faith, and you know, all throughout the world, women are veiled, but the hijab, there's a certain amount of
Belligerent
opposition.
hostility.
Yeah,
You
towards
know,
that.
you bring that up, that's, it brings back interesting memories. My mother was a good Catholic, and so I remember my younger days going to church with Mother Tammen, and a woman always covered her head. You know,
A lacy veil of something.
something. You know, when I was in
hat.
high school, if the high school girls forgot their headscarf, they put a handkerchief or something, and so it's nothing unusual for women to be doing head coverings, and so with the hijab, I know that it's more than just for worship services, but still it's nothing greatly out of the ordinary for those of us who are educated in the Christian faith.
Right.
So I can't quite understand all the hostility to people having different customs than we have now. And you know, customs can change. Now a good Catholic woman can pretty much wear whatever she wants.
Well, one of the gals at that session was a Caucasian gal. Actually, yeah, one was a Caucasian gal, and she had converted to the Muslim, to Islam, and decided, I think from the onset, to wear the hijab out of respect for her religious preference. And the other gal was, I believe, maybe from Pakistan, and chose to wear the hijab in opposition to what her family wanted her to do. Her mom and her other relatives and her family did not want her to wear the hijab to show that she was Muslim, because for fear that she would be harmed. And it's interesting because her father is a doctor here in town,
Oh,
an emergency room doctor, I believe. I don't know if he still is, but was at the time. And she was one of the presenters, and I found that very fascinating. And I still have the DVD, and I'm going to run that again on this channel again sometime, because it's important for people to understand that the similarities between Islam and the Jewish faith and Christianity, there's a certain amount of tenets that are pretty darn similar.
the children of Abraham.
The teachings are pretty darn similar. And we have this, like you said, this hostility in this country toward Islam, and it's all a bunch of hype. It's driven by fear and hate. I think racial bigotry, just flat out racial bigotry, and religious bigotry. But anyway, we didn't. I didn't get to meet you that day, other than afterwards we met. And I remember standing out. We were, I think, at the Atwood Center or somewhere, and I remember asking you to consider running for office, because I just knew when I met you that you're the kind of person that can't be bought, and that's exactly what we need for representatives. And I don't think you seriously considered running, but I still think you should run for some type of office. And I didn't get to visit with you a whole lot because I was visiting with him more about his presentation. And but I want to spend a little time now talking about. So now the audience is aware of how I met the both of you. And when we visited recently, you and I, you were so gracious when I used your bathroom in the RV,
motorhome, yeah.
and that was during the September Camp Ripley protest that I called, as well as Brainerd Peace Group called, on the same day as their Community Appreciation Day. Camp Ripley's is that day, which is actually a recruitment retention event. And if anybody doesn't think that's true, they should go back to the range regulation. I believe it was in the 2012 or 2013 range regulation that stated clearly that in the beginning of that document that the Community Appreciation Day, and they might have called it something different back then, but it's clearly recruitment retention. It's to get our young people captivated by this false idea that joining the military is going to allow them to comfortably and luxuriously and with a whole bunch of bells and whistles as well, see the world and do good for their country. And it's especially important now to get our young people motivated to join the military because student loan debt, and I'm understanding that that more than anything has motivated and gotten the recruitment way up. They got all they needed for soldiers because there's so many young people carrying the debt, and there's no other way to get rid of it other than if you have a windfall, like you get $100,000 at the casino, or you have a rich aunt or uncle or some relative die and now you've inherited a lot of money, you can pay it off. Because you're certainly not going to be able to pay that off with most jobs that you're getting from a four-year education anymore. Those jobs disappeared in 2008, a lot of them. So we visited in your RV. You were gracious, invited me to have a little beverage with you, and we visited, and I got to know you a little bit better. And I found it interesting, your story. And so I want to talk, we've got about a half an hour left, and I think that's about the right amount of money, or the right amount of time. So what we can talk about how you guys met and the things that have held you together, because you've been married for a long time, a lifetime, I believe.
45 years.
And that's so admirable. A lot of times I see couples that are older and they're obviously been together a lifetime. You can kind of tell the respect level that's shown from the guy to the woman. I can always identify that. And I always compliment people that, because it takes a lot of work to stay together in a marriage. Now, you folks don't have any children. That complicates things more when you have kids, to be able to stay together, because there's all kinds of other side issues with that. But I'm sure you've had your struggles, ins and outs, ups and downs. And so I want to talk about how you met, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about, what led up to your marriage, and, your careers before you married, and you were in the service before you married, and so on. But I'm just going to let you guys have a little conversation about that, because I think the viewers can learn from that. We were visiting a little bit out front here before we started filming today, and you mentioned that you've been through some not so pleasant things, that you got through together, that you gave up together. So I'm just going to turn it over to you guys right now.
Well, we were talking about our younger days. We were both free spirits to a great extent.
Party people.
But, when we were both travelers too. What year did you teach in Alaska?
63.
63. When was was that the year the earthquake was?
Yes. Yep.
So,
63, 64, yeah.
Pat taught in Aurora, then she went to Alaska and taught a year and had kind of a sad experience there. Her first husband killed in a car accident just a few weeks after they were married.
Yeah, we were married 5 weeks.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So,
Coming home from work.
Pretty traumatic.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was.
so Pat came back to Minnesota then, and of course after I got out of the service I was just bouncing around.
Now, you grew up or were from what area?
I grew up in South Dakota between Mitchell and Sioux Falls. Pretty good, decent farming country, I suppose comparable to here. And so I grew up on a family farm.
And you grew up where?
I grew up near about 20 miles from Thief River Falls, northwestern part of. Originally was born in Missoula, Montana, and so originally from that part of the country, and the folks apparently couldn't make it out there. I'm 82 years old. I was born in 37, So moved to Minnesota and lived with my grandmother, and it was tough times then for her too. My dad was a farmer, but kind of a shiftless sort of person. He had a drinking problem. My mother was a very sickly person, so was, in fact, she died of emergency surgery in 1948. It would have been, and gallstones. Nowadays, that wouldn't be, I guess, but that was back then, and. Stayed. We stayed on the farm till my grandmother got sick, and she was widowed and widowed twice. And after she got sick, we moved into town, Thief River Falls, and it would have been my mother's half sister. We lived with her then. She had a hotel in Thief River Falls, and so we stayed there until my grandmother died. Well, then we moved back out to the farm that she owned, and we worked out there. My sister and I, she's a year younger than I am, and we stayed out there and worked until, well, we came back into town because we were both places, the hotel and the farm, because this half aunt owned now both places. And I went to school, high school, in Thief River, as did my sister Tressie, and it was pretty bad. Should I cover
It was
all
a
the
violent
details?
family.
Okay, it was.
Dad ended up in Gillette Children's Hospital for 10 months.
Because I was thrown down the steps because of I came to work 5 minutes late, 5 minutes, and was an upstairs hotel. And so anyway, 10 months in Gillette State, and they treated me wonderfully. They really took care of me. And to this day, I don't know who paid for it. It was the state hospital, I believe. But
And then you went to college then after that?
10 months, then I was 15 years old, so had no place to go, so back to the hotel with this aunt. And that was pretty bad news, and to the point that my sister couldn't stand it anymore. She graduated now, and she's a year younger than I am, but then I lost a year at Gillette. And it was bad news. My sister was being molested, and so she came to me fine one day and said, "Pat, I'm leaving. You want to come with me?" So I begged her to wait a few weeks because then my report card would come out, because I was still in high school, a senior in high school, and so that was fine. We waited until that, and then got a bus ticket and one-way ticket and to Fargo, North Dakota. Okay.
And then from then,
and
your
then-
lives both got better?
Yeah. So I worked at a chemical factory. Tressie did too. And pretty soon she ended up at the Manchester Biscuit Company in Fargo. And I graduated from Fargo, North Dakota High School. And the grades were pretty decent. So the dean of girls, gosh, something like 350 kids were seniors, and there were 3 other Pat Andersons anyway. And the dean of girls wrote a letter of recommendation for me to get a scholarship. This would have been Bismarck, North Dakota. And I received it and ended up going to school then at Mayville, North Dakota State Teachers College. It was called then. Now it's university, I think, or something or another. And it was wonderful. So that's back in the days of 1956. You could go to school for 1 year, okay, 1 year of college, and then go out, promise your life away, and teach at a country school for 3 years. You know?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I signed the contract and did my 1 year of college, but then was offered by a gal that was in one of my classes that would I consider teaching in a town school, Bosemont, North Dakota, real close to the Minnesota-Canadian border. way up there. I'd only have 10 or 12 kids, first and second grade. It was considered a Class C town school in North Dakota. Oh, I jumped at, and the wages, oh my goodness, $2,800 a year. Wow, a year, okay. The only bad thing about it is if I accepted, I'd have to pay my scholarship back, which was $300. No choice there, just you bet. So sign here, you know. So went for the interview, and no problem. Yeah, okay. And so I taught there. For 1 year, they offered me the job for another year for $100. I said, no, I want to go back to school and finish, get a degree. For $200, okay. So I took the job for another year, stayed in North Dakota at Bosemont for 2 years, and then went back to Mayville State and to finish my degree. I had 3 years left, and or 2 years left actually. So I got a 4-year degree in 3 years, but that included going summers too, and I had 2 part-time jobs to right on campus to help bail me out and pay the tuition and everything. And of course, at that time, I should mention too, Mayville State, gosh, it was $500 a year. This included tuition and everything except books, room, board, and tuition.
Wow.
Wow, right. Not
How
happening
times have
nowadays.
changed.
Yes, yeah. Now this would have been in 1957, 58, 59, right in there. I graduated with a 4-year degree in 1961. And in 1961 then, at that time, schools were just begging for teachers. So I remember there were plenty of Iron Range superintendents that would come to Mayville or Valley City or any of the state schools in North Dakota to interview them for a teaching job. So I did, and that my first teaching job then on the range was Aurora. And I remember I remember going to the placement office to be interviewed, and I should back up a little bit. After North Dakota, I had gone to school for teaching degree and was awarded. This would have been Aurora, was awarded a contract, and then the superintendent remembered, we don't hire married women, because in between time I had after North Dakota I went to Alaska and taught up there for a year, and loved it, was great, and so my first husband was killed in a car accident coming home from work. So, and I still went by the Mrs. Dean Larson. So when I came to Bemidji for the interview, the superintendent said, we don't hire married women. So then I told him my story that I just buried my husband 2 weeks ago, and he was killed in a car, and I went through that a little bit. And his name was Mr. Sorensen, Al Sorensen. He was wonderful. So after he told me that they don't hire married women, I remember walking back to where he interviewed me, and I told him my story, and tears were running down his eyes. He said, sign here. So I got my first grade job in Aurora, Minnesota.
I wonder why they didn't hire married women.
It is pretty common on the range. Yeah. Ely didn't hire
wonder why
married
not,
women.
though.
Yeah.
What year was it that Carol Perry finally did the legal action that they had to?
57. Let's see. I came to
Yeah,
Ely
that
in
sounds
57.
discriminatory.
Oh
Yeah,
they got hauled to court.
Yeah,
First
they did.
Iron Range was.
Yeah, it took her 5 years to win it, but yeah,
Maybe because they didn't want women getting pregnant and having
that's I think part of
children
it.
and having
Yeah.
to do daycare and all the
That-
other
and
to
all
keep
that,
their
and then
job.
pay those expenses because
Yeah, that probably was it.
in Ely, I remember our hospitalization, all of that medical care was taken care of right along with the contract, as it was in Aurora. Yeah.
And a lot of jobs. Mine in the floral career, as I
Okay.
was growing up and working Back in the 70s, healthcare was not a big deal. It was included in a person, you didn't have any probationary period or anything. You got hired and you had instant healthcare.
That's the way this was.
Yeah,
Same thing. Yeah.
Boy, times have changed in that realm too.
Yes. Yeah.
So then,
So
when did you guys meet then, and how? Because I know you were a teacher when you guys met, right?
I got out of Vietnam in '65, and I usually had a job of one kind or another. I was doing some electrical work, and so I was doing electrical work in Minnesota, and then they had a job up in the Ely area, and I jumped at that, close to the Boundary Waters canoe area, and
yeah.
that's when I met Pat, and of course, we met in the library. That's our story. We're sticking to it.
And this is in where, Ely?
Ely.
You're sticking to it.
Well, anyhow, I met Pat and Ely, and previous to that, I bounced around a lot, and then we settled down a little bit, and I went to work in the mines. And it wasn't that I couldn't find any other job; it was just the mines were there, and they were hiring big time. If you had a pulse in those days, you could probably get a job in the mines.
And it probably paid pretty well too.
Yeah. And
Not bad, actually. I think I took a little cut in wages to go to work in the mines because I'd been working construction contractor work.
Oh yeah, okay.
So it wasn't a big cut. I was making decent wages, but I think it was just because I'd met Pat, so I'd looking around. There were mining jobs, so I grabbed a few of them. Then got a little training in the mining and electrical. So I stayed at Mintac for 4 years, and I quit them. Went back to work for contractors, and I actually ended up going right back to work at Mintac. Only this time I'm building an expansion rather than operating the existing plant. They expanded Mintac twice. They started out with about 6 million ton capacity, then they doubled it to 12, then I think they added another 6, and then I believe they ripped some of it out. So their capacity is probably in the vicinity of 16 million tons now. Anyhow, that's where I got a lot of my experience in the mines was there.
And then you guys met, and after you met in Ely, then you dated and you married when you were at Ely?
We got married. Pat continued teaching in Ely. The economy was up and down, and I think it was '82 you took your leave of absence.
yeah.
Because the '80s, the economy blew up on the range, went to hell. And so Pat took a 5-year leave of absence, and we did some serious traveling. And of course, Pat is not lazy, so wherever I ended up working, she'd substitute teach or else teach full time. And probably about, 85, we ended up out in Utah. I picked up an electrical job at a power plant in Delta, Utah, and Pat had rights for the school. She started subbing right away, and they liked the work she did, so they hired her full time. So she was a full-time teacher, and of course, Pat enjoyed teaching those Mormon kids.
Oh, it was
the majority
wonderful.
were Mormon.
Yeah.
I think
yeah.
Pat would have actually stayed there.
I would have.
And because even though we were partied a little bit in our younger days, by that time in our life we both quit drinking and smoking, not for religious reasons. We're not Mormons, but still we quit drinking and smoking. And didn't they ask you when you did the interview whether if you were pregnant or if you're smoking or drinking, which technically they're not supposed to?
In fact, she apologized, kind of, and said, I know I'm not supposed to ask you this, but... and she was a great principal.
Yeah, we
I
enjoyed our
her
time
very
out there.
much.
And so the story I like is that you tell about it was a good Mormon school, majority,
yeah.
so they didn't have any coffee in the faculty lounge. The principal said, if you want a coffee pot, you can have it down in the basement where the janitor's room is. But Pat would take her thermos along to work. We're coffee drinkers. And sometime at the end of the day, the good Mormon teachers would sneak in there for a cup of Pat's coffee.
Or before the end of the day. Yeah.
Because Mormons are not supposed to drink coffee, huh?
Yeah,
Well,
no
those out
caffeine.
there-
Yeah, no caffeine. They didn't do Coke products, Bob, or
What do they say?
coffee.
The body is the temple of the soul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, temple of God. Yeah, yeah. And you
So-
have no business destroying it in any way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they really
And you like teaching the Mormon kids because they were what, respectful and
very, very. And I'd have to say I had 28 second graders.
That's quite a few.
Quite a few, yeah. And I absolutely did not have discipline problems. I mean, they were just taught at home that you respect, you know,
How to be
any
respectful.
yeah, and authority, and that's just the way it was.
Mm-hmm.
I have to back up a minute too. I was thinking when I was teaching in Aurora, they did hire married women, so I kind of
Ely
strike
did
that.
not, huh?
But Ely did not.
Okay.
No, not until the laws changed, which was in 1969. So then, as I understand, Ely and Tower did not hire married women and were the last two districts in the state to change because of the discrimination laws.
wow.
Yeah.
And so now you guys have been together for 45 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say is the glue that's helped you guys to stay together?
We promised.
Yeah, and respect each other, you know.
I guess
So
that's
you
it.
honor the promise that you made.
Promised to forsake all others. And,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. And we both have. Never
we
was a
had
problem with any of
similar
that.
temperaments in some way. When work slowed up in the 80s, like I said, in 82, Pat took a leave of absence. That was no great punishment for her to take a leave of absence and go, for both of us to go traveling. So we both like to travel. You know, it takes a little organizing to get the motorhome ready to go, and Pat's good at organizing, and I'm the person that does not mind driving. You know, Pat doesn't drive the motorhome much anymore, but
Not for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I don't mind driving. So, you know, she gets the motorhome ready to go, and I herd it down the road. And if you're involved in my environmental activities, Veterans for Peace, Grandmothers for Peace, there's always something going on someplace in Minnesota. And we kind of think, you know, if we can contribute a little bit at this stage in our lives, it's time to give back.
And along with that, wherever Bob was working, well, then I would do substitute teaching or volunteer work. And so we covered a lot of the country, a lot in Michigan.
A lot
Michigan,
of states that you taught in over the years.
Wisconsin, the Dakotas.
Now, did you travel in a motorhome all those years then?
We kept our house in Sudan, but you know, you've seen our little motorhome now. We downsized after I retired. My mother passed away. You know, we didn't have kids, but we did have Pat's
Nieces.
twin nieces with us a lot when they were from the time they were 6 until they were
Yeah.
12.
We were godparents to those kids. From
And
the
so
very
during the
beginning, so-
summer, we'd have those kids with us. So we had a 30-foot
lot.
motorhome then.
Oh,
So
okay.
Yeah.
then you had a little bedroom in the back
the
end.
back,
Maybe we
yeah.
put the kids back there, and the Pat and I would sleep over the cab. You had a little privacy. And it was, so with that size motorhome, people that don't mind living like that, it's not punishment there either. And I try to find
Kids
a
loved it.
camp spot
Yeah, I
where
bet they did.
Kids
Yeah.
loved it.
so like when I had a job in Upper Michigan, I actually parked the motorhome in Ashland, Wisconsin, because they had a nice RV park right next to Lake Superior, a nice sandy beach. And so I only had 40 miles is not a bad commute where it's out in the country like that. So I'd leave Pat and the girls there at the beach, and I'd go to work, and
You must have had a little car,
yeah,
taking a little car
Yeah,
with
Bob
you. And
did, yeah.
yeah, we had a little car, a little pickup.
so you
Yeah.
go back and forth to work.
Yeah.
What an interesting way to live. I didn't know that people did that. I
Yes.
mean, other than going on a vacation,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what you think most people do with an RV. But you guys use that for your work, and even though you maintained a place, a permanent home, you had the best of both worlds.
You
We
know,
did,
I
we
talk
did.
about trying to get people that we need to get more people into our smaller communities rather than create all jobs in the metro. And I think about that now as we're talking about it. We always kept our home. In wintertime, we turned the heat down way low and lock the door and leave.
Right.
And
Take out the garbage, clean out the fridge.
shake the rug.
Yeah, shake the rug.
that's that's what makes a marriage work. Pat has a certain thing about when we're packing up that motorhome to go, we go through the little list and then we're ready to head out to the motorhome. The last thing she has to do is shake the rug. She wants that rug clean when she comes home. And, I put up with that for years. We're ready to go, then I have to stand there and wait patiently while she shakes the rug. And I finally said something. She says, oh, okay. And so the next time we go someplace, she heads out the door. She doesn't shake the rug, but she turns around and says, Bob, dear, would you shake the rug before you come out to the motorhome? And so I shake the rug before we come out to the motorhome. And so, you kind of respect
Back
each
and
other.
forth. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we
Well,
do.
that's a nice concept. Then you don't have to clean the minute you come in the door. Because in my experience in travel, and I didn't do all that much, but the travel that I did do, I was in like past 40, went on a couple cruises and a couple of different vacations, and some were with my kids a little bit before I moved up here. If you don't do your laundry and clean the house before you leave and make the beds and so on, you got a mess to come home to, and it's a lot of work to pack up and get ready to go. It's when you're leaving, it's work. When you're coming back, it's work.
And Bob gives me plenty of ahead of time, so I know as I can get my chores done. Like
Or
you say, the
sometimes we
laundry.
don't have a lot of warning. Something pops
Oh,
up,
yeah.
an email that,
But now the joy with traveling in an RV is that your dishes and your kettles and pots and pans and even probably your shampoo and conditioner and everything that you need can
all
be
there.
kept in there. Whereas if you're going like on a cruise or traveling on an
hotels,
airplane,
motels.
you got to pack all that in your suitcase, but you can leave things to be a little bit more in the RV, so it makes it a little more pleasant
Right. Yeah, we do.
and a little more home-like too.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we've got 5 minutes left. Time has flown here.
it has. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It has, yes.
Well, just to wrap things up a little bit, just briefly between the two of you, share with why it's important for you to go, and maybe a little bit of, not a list, but a little sampling of all the things you've done in Minnesota and maybe a little bit out of state too, things that have interested you, why you go to the Brainerd 4th of July parade every year and join the Brainerd Peace Group up there, and you go to events down in the Twin Cities, and just share a little bit of that.
I suppose part of it, you taught for 30 years and you've got children that you're thinking of the generations to come. That's part of it.
That's
our
it.
obligation to the next generation, or of course the tribe's say for 7 generations. And the other thing is,
Leave clean water for them.
that's it.
For the kids
both,
that I taught.
We're both water people.
Yeah,
Canoeing, in our younger
and
days,
fishing.
we had a little Evinrude motor
Swimming.
on our canoe. They made a lot of the boundary waters non-motorized, and really that didn't bother us a bit. We left the motor at home and started paddling. Neither of us minds paddling. Of course, the muscles are giving out little in our
A little
golden
bit,
years.
yeah.
But we value clean water, and if we do nothing, our water is being degraded right now.
Yep.
As we sit here. And so if you're thinking about future generations, we have an obligation to do something. And it's the same with global warming. The science is pretty good by now. If you doubt global warming, you're not paying attention. So that's part of what keeps Pat and I going around the state of Minnesota. We're retired. You can move to a low tax state, move your official residence, and duck your state taxes. We have cousins in South Dakota. We could have a South Dakota address and quit paying these Minnesota income taxes. We've never considered it.
No, never.
We're committed to Minnesota. It's in many ways it's a progressive state. We want to be part of that. We know it can go either way, but I'm not a good Catholic like my mother would want me to be, but still, I remember the lessons I learned. Am I my brother's keeper or my sister's keeper? You have to answer that question. Who is my neighbor? and growing up on a farm, I know who neighbors are.
We've got 2 minutes
Okay.
left. Isn't it funny how time flies? When
Yes, it does.
I
Yeah.
knew that it would.
It would.
We'd need at least an hour to talk about this, and we can talk some more about. Before we started filming today, Mark, the station manager here, and you were visiting a little bit about Vietnam and Thailand and how you took your R&R in Bangkok and different things like that. We can talk a little bit more in the next segment. Unfortunately, we're out of time for that, but I have so appreciated listening to and learning more about you folks, and you started coming to the protests here at Camp Ripley because, if you can just share, like maybe within 1 minute, of why you felt it important to come to that.
Well, I have a special connection to Camp Ripley because I served on the ground in Vietnam. I wasn't knee deep in blood and guts the whole battle, but I survived enemy fire and friendly fire. So when my tour of duty was up, my 2 years were done, I thought, I'm done now. I did my duty. Well, the next summer, I got orders to go to Camp Ripley for summer camp, and I was kind of offended by that. I thought, I did my duty, why should I have to sit in summer camp? And so that's why I enjoy coming here and picketing Camp Ripley, because they never should have sent me to summer camp after I served my country in combat.
Well, and we can't go into it in detail, but a gentleman came up in his truck playing this song with blasting from his truck. It was some kind of Ranger song or something.
Yeah, Green Berets or
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
And in this area, there's a strong Vietnam veterans group, pro-Vietnam veterans group.
Yeah.
They don't think like you do that it was a mistake to be in Vietnam. They're proud of their service. They think it was just fine, everything we did and all that. But we're going to have to carry this into the next film because we're out of time here. But it's good that we're letting the people know that we're going to start the next segment with a little bit more about that, because there is a great difference between your philosophy and Veterans for Peace as opposed to what the local Vietnam vets group here believes.
Well, I want my fellow Vietnam vets to know that I'm wearing these paratroopers' wings. I earned them the hard way.
And thanks so much for coming down and sharing your story. It's been really interesting, and I'm sure the viewers feel the same way. And so watch the next video the next following month, whenever you're seeing this one aired. I'm not sure when that will be, and thanks again so much for coming down here and sharing your story and letting me talk to you about things that are important. It's been really great having you.
It's been great talking to you, Robin.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
And thanks, viewers, for watching, and we'll see you next time. Can we talk?